Wonderful. So I am Dr. Gabriela Baiza Ventura, Associate Professor in the Department of Hispanic Studies here at the University of Houston and Deputy Director at Arte Público Press and Co-Director of the US Latino Digital Humanities Center. On behalf of Arte Público, Recovering the US Hispanic Literary Heritage Program, and USLDH, we welcome you to this talk. As many of you know, Arte Público and Recovery, two important forces in the field of US Latino studies, were founded and are directed by Dr. Nicolás Canelos. His vision to establish the nonprofit press and the historical archival program stemmed from a social justice need to document the legacy of Latinos and Latino culture, language, and literature in the United States. To date, Arte Público has published over 700 books, fiction, nonfiction, including YA and children's literature. And Recovery has located approximately 1,500 newspapers. They have digitized thousands of records that document the presence of the Latino people in this land that we now know as the United States. The social justice need continues to this day as we fight against the erasure of our bodies and languages on a daily basis. As a result, the need to create a center that could use these resources that we have at the recovery program in Arte Público gave us a foundation to in the push to establish the Center for US Latino Digital Humanities that my colleague, Dr. Carolina Villarroel, Brown Foundation Director of Research at Recovery, at the recovery program, and I began about 7 years ago with the support of grants from the Mellon Foundation, and then a new grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are very grateful to Patricia Shui and Don Waters for their guidance from the Mellon Foundation, and we are happy to report that we have made really important strides in the field. Our team has grown to include former postdoc who has been working diligently and very closely with us, Dr. Lorena Gathero, who you all have known and worked with. She's our digital programs manager. Together, we organize talks and workshops on DH, and social justice. We present across the US. We train and mentor students and faculty from all academic levels and community members on USLDH praxis. We create digital projects and data sets. And most recently, we've begun working with elementary school students to bring the archive and the digital humanities training into the classroom. We have awarded approximately 25 grants in aid for US Latinx digital humanities projects with the goal to strengthen training for digital humanities for our Latino communities and to advance Latino archives. And it is our mission to continue doing this work. I invite you to visit our website, artepublicopress.com, for more information, to please follow us on social media, to continue to use the hashtag USLDH, to live tweet our lectures, and to tweet about US Latino and Latina literature, history, culture. Arte Público is a nonprofit organization, so any visibility that we get, any books that are bought, continue to foment the work that we do and to sponsor, talks, graduate students, and these programming that we have ongoing for our communities. Before I introduce our presenters, I would like to go over some logistics for Q&A. We invite you to use the chat function to type in your questions or comments. After all the presentations are done, you will be invited to ask the questions by unmuting yourselves, or Lorena and I could read the questions to the speakers. And so now we're going to go ahead and turn to our speakers. Let me open my file. Okay, so the first presentation is under the care of Marisa Hicks Alcaraz and Yesenia Perez, and the title of their grant was US Latina Film Recovery. All right, guys, take it away. We can't hear you.
I was just mostly talking to myself. I was just going to open up the slides. I'll screen share. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for attending. Thank you so much to USLDH for supporting this work. And okay, so yeah, so the project that we're developing is called the Latina Film Recovery Project. My name is Marisa Hicks Alcaraz. I'm the director of LFRP, and I'm also a postdoc in gender and women's studies at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I'm also a co-founder of Imaginex en Movimiento, or ICSOM Memory Collective, which works with folks in the community on their own archival projects, digital initiatives, and I do that mostly outside of the walls of academia to support work that's happening outside of the university and in the community. And Yesenia, do you want to go ahead and introduce
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
yourself?
Thank you so much, USLDH, for having us here. It's such an honor to be here and to get to present our work and Marisa's fabulous project, and I'm so happy to have been able to help with it. My name is Yesenia. I use she, they pronouns, and I've been a research assistant on this project, but I'm also a multimedia archivist. I just completed my MLIS program this year, where I specialized in audiovisual archival studies. Thank you. And I work at the Juno Mazer Lesbian Archives in West Hollywood, California, as well as the Margaret Herrick Library in Los Angeles, California.
Okay, thanks, Yesenia. Okay, so just a little bit of information about our project. LFRP is an online resource to advance research on and enhance public access to the work of US Latina filmmakers, specifically from the 20th century. And we've started the project by searching for Latinas working at all levels of film production based in the US in the 20th century to address the erasure of independent Latina media histories. And the goals of our project are currently to prompt historical research on the work of US-based Latina filmmakers from the 20th century, to facilitate national and transdisciplinary connections between researchers, filmmakers, and activists, also archivists, and to reconfigure independent media history by foregrounding the fact that Latinas worked in many capacities behind the scenes on a transnational scale.
Marisa?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just
go
saw
for
a
it.
comment by Mary, and I want to make sure that people can see the slides. It seems to say loading on the screen, which is also what I see, but I wasn't sure if it was just
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, because I didn't have the chat open. Let's see. So I can see it on my end, so it might just be like a Wi-Fi issue.
Maybe try refreshing or sharing it as full screen. Oh, there we go. I see something now. Do other folks also see?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just keep it open like this. Okay. Were you able to see the previous slides? I'll just like run through them really fast. Yeah, it's when you open the slides. Oh, okay, got it. Cool. Thank you all for the feedback. Okay, that was the previous slide that I was on. The top image is a screenshot of the timeline we created as part of the project. And then another, it's a film grab of Nina Serrano, which is one of the filmmakers that we feature, working on a film called Gesed, What is to be Done in 1970, from 1970. Okay, and so then, yeah, so going over the project goals is to prompt historical research, facilitate connections that are transdisciplinary and nationwide among researchers, filmmakers, activists, also archivists, and to reconfigure independent media history. Okay, and as a digital reference tool and database to other resources and archival holdings, LFRP is dedicated to emphasizing the availability of still and moving image material, as well as use for archival and bibliographic information in order to encourage further research. And so the resources that Yesenia and I are creating are part of this first phase of the project, which thus far has included a timeline with brief career profiles and a bibliography and primary source materials list, and a list of films with metadata available online and or on DVD, and that are available in public library collections. So currently we have 9 profiles that we created through Timeline JS, and I'll show those profiles throughout the slideshow. And we have about 50 films in our filmography or film metadata sheet, which we use Google Sheets for, and we have 25 sources in our bibliography. And so all of these resources were created using open-facing online platforms. So like, again, we created the timeline using Timeline JS, which is an open source digital tool that enables creators to build visually rich interactive timelines using a Google Sheet. And we chose a timeline format as one of the resources because it's an easy way to see the activity of filmmakers while highlighting current gaps in research. We also created a metadata sheet of our film list using Google Sheets. The metadata format enables us to organize all the production information about each film, including where they're located, where digital copies, but also original copies are held. And we also use Google Docs to create a bibliography of secondary sources. So for this stage, we're just using Google Docs right now because it's a simple way to organize information. And in this case, it's a list of films. But also what's great about using Google Drive is that including for for Sheets, but also Docs, is that we can work collaboratively on content creation simultaneously. And then also it's a great way to also have a conversation virtually about the different materials and what we're creating. So we tend to do that through Google Comments as well. Okay, so Yesenia, do you want to talk about your findings, the materials that you created? We can kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
Is there a reason? Do you want me to stay on this slide in particular, or the next slide?
No, we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Thank you. So
yeah, of course.
Here's a brief summary of our findings. One being that Latinas are often uncredited for their work. So having been a research assistant on this project and gathering secondary sources and trying to conduct research regarding the filmmakers themselves and the films that they worked on, it was really, a challenge was really that oftentimes the filmmakers were mentioned only in passing in articles that were really focused on predominantly on male Chicano filmmakers. And oftentimes when they were mentioned, they were really just mentioned in a very brief and non-exhaustive way. And so this led to our second finding, which is that there were major gaps between the early 20s and late 60s. There was such an influx of Chicano films during the 70s. And obviously with that, we would assume that there would be female filmmakers involved and also female filmmakers involved in their production teams. However, much of the scholarly research done around films of the 70s are focused predominantly on male filmmakers. So this gap in film history is in the early half of the century. And what the research has shown is that just because Latinas don't appear in film archives and historical writing, that doesn't mean that they don't exist. So it was important to ask ourselves what was happening in the industry at that time, as well as politically, economically, and socially during that time period that may have contributed to that gap. Is there an actual gap in filmmaking related to historical or political events happening at that time? And then with that in mind, we were also trying to locate public access copies for films that might be in existence. As Marisa mentioned, we have that metadata spreadsheet that we created based on the template that was provided to us, which we also adapted to format specific to film and video. So it was important to include, for example, the formats of public access copies that might be in existence. So formats that are lower quality like Humanic and VHS, which run the risk of obsolescence. So it was important to consider the formats of existing copies, which emphasize the urgency of locating them and creating digital copies, which would hopefully, ideally, be a future step in this project.
Yeah, and I could just briefly show what I would consider to be more of like a draft of our timeline. This is the Google Sheet template. So it allows for us to put in the dates that the filmmakers were active. We could also put in like birth dates, when they died, if they're no longer living, descriptions about the filmmaker and their work, as well as media. Okay. Yeah, it's really useful to visualize. If like you look, it's not, yeah, okay, there we go. So if we look down at the timeline, you can see that there was a lot of activity going on in the 1920s, 30s, and then this is actually a gap. I think for some of these, we put in the date for like according to their birth date. I think what we're going to do instead is just focus on the creation dates, because that'll give you a better visualization of when it was that we're working, and it'll let us see the gaps more clearly, because you know, between about 21, 22, there's a big gap until the late 1960s. There's not too much film that has been researched or that is like publicly available information that's publicly available about films created in the 1960s. But then you see a big like influx here in the 1970s and 80s, and then this is primarily what we're focusing on for this phase of the project. But in the future, we want to focus on also the 1980s and the 1990s. So yeah, so these are just some examples. These are films that were created. These are the bios. And so, like I said, we're going to be cleaning this up. But these are just kind of like placeholders, for example. And so the career bios include their ethnicity, what roles they took on, and especially in the earlier part, like in the 1960s and 1970s, early 1970s, filmmakers were taking on like a lot of roles. So there'd be directors, producers, screenwriters. And then in a lot of cases, we found where a Latino was working with her spouse, for example, like Efraín Gutierrez, who is known for making the first Chicano feature film, Please Don't Bury Me Alive. His spouse, Josefina Faz, is uncredited, but she took many different roles in making that film. So, and that included like co-directing, producing, writing, co-writing, and then even acting in it as well. Let's see.
That's
And
wonderful.
so, what's that?
That's wonderful.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'll leave it at that. I'm gonna go quickly back to the slideshow. And do you want to talk about challenges of your challenges, Yesenia, and then I can go into
Yeah, of
If,
course.
if you all don't mind, I mean, we're at the 10-minute mark.
where's the time? Okay.
So we can, but we can definitely bring you guys back in to talk about that when we ask that question about challenges at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds good. Okay. Thank you.
Cool, wonderful. The next set of presenters are Mary Oken and Olivia Bowman. Yeah, it's wonderful, and they will be the title of their research grant is March with Us. It's like Google's not cooperating today, right? Right.
Mhm.
I actually downloaded it onto PowerPoint just in case that was happening to me yesterday when I gave a lecture. So I don't know what's going on with it. I haven't had that issue. So hi, my name is Mary Oken, and the full title of our project is March with Us: Lessons in Activism from San Jose State. And I'm presenting today with one of my former students and now my project collaborator, Olivia Bowman. Olivia, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
So our project concerns the wider civil rights era history of student activism at San Jose State in the 1960s, faculty activism as well, but mostly student activism. And the Chicano movement is a part of that. So we're kind of calling this presentation Chapter 1 because thanks to USLDH funding, we've been able to focus and go into greater depth in researching that particular movement. So this project began in a class that I was teaching, and it's kind of grown organically into its own research project. It was begun during COVID, and this is me on the first day of teaching in fall of 2021. And I share that because there were limitations to the kind of work I could do with students in terms of archival research. That semester, it was the first semester we were opening up as a campus, and the archives were closed. And so I only had digital collections to work with. And so the project kind of emerged from one of those collections. So my goals in teaching it were to help students learn digital humanities tools and methods. But I also, as a matter of equity and as an alum of San Jose State who really believes in helping students learn how to do research and kind of empower themselves to be knowledge creators, I wanted them to do original research, and I wanted them to start developing an original project and be able to be creative with what they were learning. So I gave them two options. One was the early history of the university, which is part of the university collections, and the other was the Civil Rights and Campus Protest collection, which is a database or a collection that's been digitized partially of negatives covering the 1960s and student activism. So this is an image showing you a screenshot of that collection on the San Jose State Library and Special Collections website. And you can kind of see some of the images and the titles of those images here. So the project, in terms of its beginnings, was co-founded and kind of co-created with undergraduate students. Olivia is one of them. And then the guiding principles for working with that Civil Rights and Campus Protest collection became, not only making student collaborator labor visible, which is part of like data feminism and best practices in digital humanities, but increasingly helping to make 1960s student activism labor visible, which it currently really isn't as far as how San Jose State self-presents about its 1960s campus history. And then the other portion of it, which is about the way the project emerged and was developed, and also about the kind of work we want to do in terms of public-facing outcomes, is to amplify student voices specifically. San Jose State's kind of big claim to fame is a moment of protest at the 1968 Summer Olympics. This was part of the larger movement of campus activism in the 60s. And two students, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, raised their fists at the 1968 Summer Olympics. And it's an internationally famous moment that San Jose State students participated in. And there are two statues on campus, or a statue on campus devoted to that. But most students at San Jose State, as I discovered, and faculty as well, don't know much about what movement those students were part of, what the broader context of civil rights that the community that they were part of was doing. And so there's a lot of work to do in terms of really highlighting and in some cases correcting the history that is presented. This is the kind of first project goal was to amplify foot soldier activists, so all the people around these two famous students and their mentor. And then the second goal is to critique the institution, which actively suppresses student activist history and student voices. And just, I'm not going to read the full quote on the right, but this is from San Jose State's website, kind of 2 or 3 layers in about San Jose State history and the 1960s and 70s. And it mentions kind of larger names across the nation, the university president, and there's no mention of the really important activism that completely transformed campus and continues to guide the way the university operates. So the third goal of our project is a more accurate historical record. So I showed you the image on the left, and the image on the right is a detail from SJSU Special Collections showing you the metadata for this particular image. And what you see is Chicano Student Protest as the title, and then a very broad description of Chicano student protests, racial discrimination, poverty, housing, etc. And what isn't included there are the names of the students who were involved, the specific group, the specific students who were leaders of that group, and what they were doing and who they are, which we believe is really important in terms of making that labor visible. So there were 3 major areas or movements on campus that coalesced in the 60s. There was Black activist groups who were involved in that Olympic protests in 1968. There were anti-Vietnam War groups, which most students on campus interested in social justice participated in because of the Vietnam War draft. And then there were Chicano student groups, and that's been our focus this year. They had major outcomes that have remained a core part of campus in terms of what they were able to do just in the 1960s and then well beyond that. Which we haven't quite gotten to in terms of our research. So the first major outcome was the Chicano graduation ceremony in 1968, the same year as the Olympics. The Educational Opportunity Program, which continues, both of those as institutions continue. Teatro Urbano, which was a series of events of particular interest to us, and then the Chicana and Chicano Studies Department, which is one of the first in the country. So in terms of what we've done so far for the project overall, and then what we're doing now, the project began with my first set of students mapping where demonstrations and other events happened on campus. And this is work that we're continuing in terms of incorporating ArcGIS and story maps and possibly walking tour app into the research that we've continued to do past that initial step in terms of not only being able to tell you where events related to civil rights took place, but who was involved in them and what they were trying to do. In the second semester, which was Olivia's class, and the following one in the fall, I asked students to look into actually the archival record beyond the photos and what buildings appear in them. And out of that came a desire among the students to interview alums, and we started to do that. So the image at the top right is the first Zoom interview that we did for oral history interviews with Ira Meltzer, leader of the anti-war movement, and his friend Tony Quintero, who is the first leader of the Chicano movement that we interviewed and who subsequently introduced us to many other people involved in the Chicano movement on campus, who are all of whom are inspiring, incredible people who have gone on many times to continue to do work in the community. We've also, in identifying those names, kind of created a feedback loop to special collections and archives, providing them data as requested, and then working on how we might want to incorporate that data into our own projects, probably through Omeka, story maps, and other ways to share what we found with the public. So in 2023, as I mentioned, we've kind of focused almost entirely on the Chicano movement alone and documented in much greater detail the beginnings of organizing, the various student groups, so C, MASC, and MECHA, which Olivia will say a little bit more about, the Chicano graduation ceremony, EOP, etc. And we've had a chance to find some really exciting things. On the right is the title page of a document called Interracial Prejudices in San Jose, California from 1950. So a decade before we started getting into 1960s research, and it's the incredible work by students at San Jose State, giving us a lot of background for the Chicano movement and the other movements on campus. We've also been figuring out issues that we've had with project data and collecting. So distributing MOUs, writing and distributing MOUs, working with SGSU and the Freedom Archives to figure out what partnering with them would look like. So for example, discovering that for them to accession a collection and then working on image permissions, continuing with oral history interviews and their transcription, corresponding with alumni to confirm our findings because there's a lot of inaccuracies in the primary documents, and then starting to be creative at the end of this month really and in the next few months with figuring out how we're going to use digital tools to visualize all of what we've discovered. And I'll let Olivia take over and tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Mary. So it was important to us to contextualize how the Chicano movement at San Jose State got started and ultimately led to the programs and resources that are available to students today. Armando Valdez, who was a young sociology student, founded Student Initiative in 1965 to speak to Chicano students on campus. And over time, in order to get more traction on gaining equality at the school, the students decided to transition to MASC and take a more militant stand. as MASC, they called for the admittance of more Chicano students, hiring more Chicano professors, the creation of the Chicano and Chicano Studies program. And when those demands weren't met, they walked out of the 1968 graduation ceremonies and had their own, the first Chicano commencement at San Jose State. And this kind of underscored the lack of resources for Chicano students, but was also a celebration of Chicano culture. And 55 years later, San Jose State still has these graduation ceremonies. On the right is a photo of Armando Valdez speaking at the 50th anniversary for the Chicano graduation walkout. So on the next slide, one of the things we've been working with the library archivist is to put names to faces. These screenshots come from a faculty-made film to help faculty understand what it was like for minority students on campus. The Chicano Group Student Initiative protested the unequal representation of Chicano voices in the film, calling for an edit of the film which included more Chicano students. But the names of the Chicano students wasn't made clear in the film, further obscuring the work of the student protesters. So we were able to identify these Chicano students and help credit the activists for their work. So at top, we have Al Espinoza, who is the first Chicano Educational Outreach Program Director. And down below, we have Dan Hernandez, who was a MASC member who decided to leave college because it was taking up time when he could do more community organizing and work in the Chicano community. So this past year, we've had standing appointments at the archives to go through materials from various collections to create context for what student life was like in the 1960s and what protesters were thinking and reading. And going through former San Jose State president's files has given us data like the changing number of minority students in the late 60s and behind the scenes conversations about how to handle student protests. The Chicano Oral History Collection has also been really helpful as several of the members interviewed have passed, a problem that we're very aware of as we continue oral history interviews for our own project. And this research has really helped us build connections between protest movements on San Jose State's campus with other campuses, as well as fill in the gaps of our understanding of how different crises on campus unfolded. And one of the...
Oh, I was going to say this
Sorry,
is
go
one
ahead.
of the treasures that Olivia found on the right.
Yeah, so in the archives, we found a ton of like great student publications. One thing that San Jose State had was a lot of very active student journalists and communicators, and very, very grateful that there was a master's program that was able to put together publications like El Machete, ¿Qué tal?, which provide a reference of what Chicano students cared about. There was everything from information about how to organize to where to go if you need tutoring to art and poetry. And it's just a great culmination of what they cared about at the time. So another thing that we've been putting together is a timeline of the transition of student initiative to MASC to MECHA. And we're going to continue filling this out as we continue our oral history interviews and gather information. We're also going to begin prototyping story maps that showcase the influence Chicano student protesters have had in their community after leaving San Jose State and more fully document the lives of Chicano student protesters, many of whom have never been contacted about their work in activism and whose stories are essential to illustrating the individual lives that go into creating a movement. And these stories haven't been told previously, so we hope to show people, the people behind the movement, the people that made this possible. So these are some of the landmarks of the Chicano groups on campus. Cesar Chavez Visiting Student Initiative was like the first Chicano group on campus to really start making waves and making demands. SI was very involved in the community. They were sponsoring a campus tour for high school students almost as soon as they started. The first time Chicano was printed in the Spartan Daily, they moved from using the term Mexican American to Chicano because they thought it better fit them and what they cared about. You know, this is an era of where the students didn't feel the way that their parents felt. They Chicano more fully was a term that more fully contextualized their identity in California rather than Mexican American. So the first time that was in print was very exciting to see. And we have a couple of different protest movements. The Chicano commencement ceremony is on this timeline, things like that.
Yeah, we should probably, I'm looking at the time, we should probably stop. We're prototyping a lot of other stuff. We thought we would get further with the digital elements of it, but the archival research has taken up so much time. So we have all of our content, or much of our content collected, and now we're turning towards the creative element. So hopefully we'll have another chance to share that with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. It's very ambitious in the sense it looks great to see the different variety of ways in which you're making these materials available to wide communities. That's wonderful. Alrighty, our third group presenting today is led by is with Kishla Rivera Lopez and Omari Zamora, and the title of their grant was Dominican DH project. All right, take it away, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to just start really quickly by introducing myself. So I'm one of the co-PIs of the Dominican DH project. I am currently a lecturer at Princeton University. I completed my PhD at Rutgers University, Newark, where I study Caribbean diasporic literature, Puerto Rican diaspora archives, memory, and narratives of womanhood, independence, and freedom. I'm currently working on my book project, finishing that manuscript, and working on this really exciting project that we'll get to talk about a little bit more. But first, I'm going to let Omaris introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for your time on a Friday afternoon. I'm an assistant professor of Afro-Latinx Studies, jointly appointed in the Department of Latino Caribbean Studies and Africana Studies at Rutgers, New Brunswick. My PhD is in Spanish and Portuguese from University of Texas at Austin. And I specialize, and still do, in Black Latinx literature and culture production with a particular focus on the transnational Dominican diaspora community. I'm currently also working on a book manuscript and trying to send that off to the press as soon as I can on my research on Afro-Latina feminist theory and knowledge production. And I am super excited to continue to work on this project with my co-PI, Kishla. And so I'll pause there and she can take it away and tell you a little more about the project.
Okay, great. So our project mostly manifested from just dialogues we had with each other while we were talking about our own personal research and book projects. We met and then we just started having like little writing sessions. And when we would take breaks and talk about what each of us were doing, we would say, me as a Puerto Rican and her as a Dominican, her in Chicago and me in New Jersey. Those are where we're home base. We would talk about these interesting intersections and how we always grew up within Dominican and Puerto Rican or Dominican neighborhoods or communities or just people. And we always noticed that intersection, that collaboration, or that sort of hybridity, but we never really seen it in the works that we were studying, though we are both scholars in Latino studies, but also in Dominican studies for Omaris and Puerto Rican studies for me. So we noticed that there was this intervention that had to be made. And so one time we talked about it and said, oh, we should develop a project about this, the Dominican work. And we kind of like said it, and then we thought about it more, and then with more conversations, we're like, let's do it. And this is where the project has begun. And we're so thankful for, USLDH, because it's sort of what gave us the first push to actually be able to do the research that we're doing and move forward and also frame it around digital humanities work. So it is a collaborative between Omaris and I, interinstitutionally. We want to look at Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, and Dominicans, so people who are of both Dominican and Puerto Rican descent, or Dominicans living in Puerto Rico that are shaped by that experience, or Puerto Ricans living in DR, or just that cross-cultural exchange. So we're looking at the cultural productions and intellectual processes that emerge from these shared identities and experiences in not just the United States, but in diaspora, right? In Puerto Rico and in DR, because we've seen a lot of like lines of thought that have gone between both islands, or in a triangular formation where you go to the US, go back to Puerto Rico, go to DR, or just keep moving, which is why when we saw that movement, we knew that we needed to do a digital project that was visual, but also map it, which is where Omaris will talk a little bit more about us using story maps. So we kind of always knew about the coexistence of these communities and how they formed, especially like in New York City, where you see the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, where these communities have always been together, but nobody has really actualized those experiences. And we wanted to bring light to that. And we hope that not just being a recovery tool, so we're looking at archival work and including that in our Digital Humanities project to show how these intellectual processes always happened, like Eugenio Maria de Hostos, Puerto Rican scholar, was exiled and also went to the Dominican Republic. Julia de Burgos, a Puerto Rican poet, also went to the Dominican Republic and developed her work, right? We have Juan Bosch from DR in Puerto Rico. And we know that this didn't just happen historically, it continues to happen, right? There's all of these exchanges. So we've done the archival work and we want to eventually get to more of the contemporary productions of like literature, maybe even music, poetry, and all other performances. So currently, I hope that that was a sufficient description, but currently we're in the project development phase and we're in research. So this is a picture of Omaris and I at an archive in the Dominican Republic, where we got really excited of all the findings that we were getting, especially in relation to Hostos. This really big prominent figure who we found out was really keen on establishing education in the Dominican Republic through his writings, but also how his writings were like fomented in both spaces. So the purpose of this is to create sort of like a research exhibit online, right, in the digital humanities sense, but also a pedagogical tool that can be used, we hope, in classrooms like K through 12, but also in college classrooms or as resources for people working on projects that will eventually also include an archive, like a working syllabus, and different tools that also lean into our social media that makes information accessible. Really quickly, Omaris, do you want to add something there as we talk about the bigger research component before I move on?
No.
Okay. Well, then I'm glad I covered it. Oh, and one thing I do want to mention is that, and I think we highlighted this in our application when we applied for the grant, is that we are the first folks, both institutionally and individually, that is highlighting this experience in this way and trying to interpret the communities, enclaves, and neighborhoods that house Dominicans in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, or New York City. And while we're looking at New York City as this big, like, diasporic site, we hope that one day we can also expand outside of New York City and look at communities in the United States that are lesser known and more invisible. And I think I even asked Omaris, is there something going on in Boston? Because I know that she was like, no, but you know, we're trying
Lawrence, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That's what we talked about.
Right. And then I was like, well, what about Florida? And she was like, no. So we're trying to find the spaces where this is also happening to also highlight and give visibility to that. So the overview of our work thus far, in the summer, we did archival trips to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, where we visited archives in multiple places. We also, in that, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneously, we did site visits, which we'll look a little bit at in a little bit. We also launched our social media accounts and hashtags. So we have a Instagram and an X account that we've highlighted our research and our progress, and we'll continue sharing as we develop. And currently, in the fall of 2023, we have been organizing our archival materials and compiling our metadata. So it's been a lot with, like, at the moment, Google Drive, which is what we were talking about a bit in the workshop about where we're going to sort of establish everything and organize it in a way. And then doing our metadata through Google Sheets at the moment that we're using to import into story maps. And then we're working on developing our story maps project for publication. We wanted to have a draft finished today, but unfortunately there's like this really weird block that we're facing, where if you don't belong to the same institution, you need to get access from an organization's administrator, and they need to give access. So right now I cannot participate in the story map, and I'm waiting to get full access so that me and Omaris can collaborate on that document together, because it doesn't function as Google Docs or any Google product. So we have a stoppage there, but we're hoping to move forward in that by the time of the MLA presentation. So our archival research and site visits in Puerto Rico. So we went in June, and we went with Dominican immigrant communities, mostly in the Barrio Obrero neighborhood of Santurce, Puerto Rico in San Juan. So this is where a lot of, they say it's like little DR in Puerto Rico, because of the businesses, the restaurants, like the food offerings, and just that everybody knows it's this community that's built historically and currently. You see it visually through like the bodegas, the restaurants, the flags, right? But also in the space of Barrio Obrero's park that has a mural for the Mirabal sisters, which are 3 huge revolutionary figures in Dominican history. We also met with Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Dominican writers or intellectuals in Puerto Rico, one of them being Mayra Santos Febres, Ana Castillo Muñoz, and Miguel Fornerin. We also went to archives, and one that was really interesting was when we went to the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. We found about all these art projects where people are really thinking about and merging these Dominican identities. So students who have either both Dominican and Puerto Rican parents, or students who are immigrants, or have parents that are Dominican heritage, but they were born in Puerto Rico, where they talk about the experiences that they face within discrimination, xenophobia, or racialization, or just feeling like an outsider, and how they navigate that. And we have more work to be done, so we actually have to return and continue working the project, because with such a limited time frame, we got a lot of recommendations, and we're told, oh, you should come back for this or this exhibit, or a lot of things that we just didn't have the time for, unfortunately, because we went to the Dominican Republic right after. But this is a very interesting place to go to, and it was on the top of our list. We went to Casa Dominicana, which translates to the Dominican house in Puerto Rico, in the near Barrio Obrero. And you can see through the 3 flags that there's this idea of like coexistence, or just shared oneness. And it is in this space that we see a lot of these moments taking place. Like there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of events, showcases, and just art that portrays this hybrid experience that we're hoping to like highlight. And this is one of them. So in this space, you see Maria de Hostos' statue. And so we see a lot of connection with him as a figure in Puerto Rican literature and independence movements. But we also see him in the archives of the Dominican Republic as well, and also in Casa Dominicana. So we thought that was an interesting Dominican intersection. And this mural here, that we don't have the caption available, but it says something about the brotherhood of Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. And you see that there's like figures and the flags of both places, and seen as oneness. So we thought that was really interesting. This is also Barrio Obrero, where I was talking about. So this is like the park if you're just walking. And this is the mural. And then we met with Mayra Santos Febres, who's a huge Afro-Puerto Rican writer, novelist, teacher, professor, and just activist. And this is us with archivists and artists in UPR Rio Piedras' archives. Oh, and this space is really interesting. I'm forgetting the name at the moment, but it's a very important space for organization. Lagoico, yes. Do you want to add something really quickly about the space? Because I'm having a brain fart.
Yeah, sure. So this space, Lagoico, is in Santurce, Puerto Rico, and it's a community space that has they host everything from plena festivals, bomba festivals. It's a place where a lot of people go to sell artisan work, as well as they have also a kitchen where like they serve food for a very low price to make it accessible to the community. Every day there's like a plato del día. So we actually had lunch there with Doctora Mayra Santos Febres, where we sat down and she was like, okay, pop out your notebook. I'm gonna tell you everybody you need to talk to. So she really is a someone who's super resourceful, not just an amazing and talented and award-winning writer and intellectual and scholar, but also right in the community. She is very well respected and is in these spaces and is very well connected. So honestly, if it wasn't for her, a lot of the work and people that we met with while we were in Puerto Rico wouldn't have been possible. So she's a very important part of this project as well as this space.
Yes, thank you so much, Omaris. What I also want to mention that's a quick note is that Omaris and I just landed in Puerto Rico and had this meeting within an hour. It was legit the only time that Mayra had available. And so it just speaks to sort of the commitment to the work that both of us had. Mayra tried to catch us right before she left for a trip that she was working on. And without her, a lot of the connections that we made would have never existed. And she really centered us in that time that we were there and connected us with various writers that we didn't know about that are Dominican and that are up and coming. And it was great. So thank you, Omaris, again. We also met with Miguel Angel Fonerin, who is actually Dominican in Puerto Rico, who was a journalist. He's a writer, he's a professor, and we met with him in Calle, and he's a professor at UPR Calle, and he gave us a scholarship of all his work, that he's one of the first people writing about this bridge of Dominican identity, Dominican intellectual thought, and bridging both spaces, both islands. And we thought that one, we were just completely impacted and changed, but he donated so many of his books to our project that we will highlight eventually on our Story Maps project, that we thought was amazing and incredible. So we were super indebted to him and thankful for that. This is also our meeting with Ana Castillo Munoz at Barrio Obrero. So what was really interesting is that Mayra connected us with her. And this is just how community works, right? And just how academia relies on community, right? We can't do this work without talking to the writers, the community activists, and just be a part of their work without actually seeing what they do or letting them lead us, right? So she walked us through the space, showed us these important locations while also telling us a bit about her experiences. And she writes a lot, and she has her own blog, and she was amazing. So we're hoping to meet up with her again when we return. This is a little bit of what I was saying at the UPR archives, that we found out about artists then and now who are producing work that are talking about this. So here it's talking about both islands, right? But trying to connect them. And that this is a big artist that we need to look into further, who had a few showcases that talks about being Dominican or being Dominican in Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of interesting material that we found, and we were so excited about that we have so much to produce, so much to integrate, and we're excited. But I'm going to move over to Omaris, who can continue the rest of the presentation.
Sure, thank you. Should I work with your slides or should I show mine?
They're the same. If you want, you can tell me to move, but I could. What do you want to do?
Okay, and let's just keep it here.
Okay.
So after we were in Puerto Rico, we went to Dominican Republic, and a lot of the work that we did there was heavily archival. There were so many things that we found in the archive, so that was very, very cool, as well as checking out Julio de Burgos Park and seeing also archives that had a lot around or by Eugenio María de Osos. Next slide. So here are some of the things that we found in the archive in the Archivo General de la Nación. One of the super exciting things that we found was that there was actually this revista called Revista Dominiqueña, which is on the far left, and or Santo Domingo y Puerto Rico. And there are so many issues of that, which is literally about Dominican and Puerto Rican writers, poetry, news. There's also in that revista the beginning of the ferries that were going between Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of ads in that revista, which is really, it was probably one of the most exciting gems, at least for me, that we found, of really being able to see how the people, right, like the everyday people, were going across, like having these exchanges already, at the turn of the 20th century. right? That a lot of people don't know. I had never even heard about this revista, so I'm really excited. One of the other things that, of course, we found is La Dominicanidad de Julia de Burgos. So Julia de Burgos, the Puerto Rican poet, writer, exiled in Dominican Republic before she actually went to New York City. And a lot of people don't know this or don't really talk about it. And so it's really interesting to see the Dominican newspapers and Dominican media talk about Julia de Burgos, right, from their perspective, right, while she's in the island, right? So that's a very Dominican intersection that is happening there that we're really excited to map and to kind of represent more in our story maps and in our engagement. And then we also have, right, Eugenia Maria de Hostos, right, who was very key in the public education curriculums of Dominican Republic, as well as especially particularly with the creation of public schools for girls, right, because young women were not allowed to go to school, right? So Eugenia Maria de Hostos is one of the folks who is involved in that at the time. Salome Ureña as well. So that's some of the things that we found in the archives. Like, this is only a small fraction, but it was much more archival. And so we've been developing metadata to kind of really place that. Next slide, please.
Oh yeah, can I just mention one thing before?
Sure.
So the middle photo is an essay or article written by Miguel Ángel Fonerin, who we did meet in Calle, Puerto Rico. So he's been doing this work for a long time and has been bridging those gaps, and we're seeing like his scholarship. But I want to say that my favorite thing that we found was this piece that said Dos Islas y una Historia, Borinquen y Quisqueya, and it has an image of both countries holding hands. And so that translates to two islands, one history, Borinquen and Quisqueya, like DR and Puerto Rico, but with their indigenous names, and really foments this idea that there's always been this connection and this idea of merging, right, or intersection between the two.
Awesome. I see we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and try to rush a little bit, and then we can talk more during the Q&A. So one of the sites that we found here is what we call in Zona Colonial El Parque Rosado, which is actually Julia de Burgos Park. And so there was, in the center picture on top of that big rock, there actually was a busto of Julia de Burgos, but it was actually vandalized recently. And to date, I haven't gone I'm actually in Dominican Republic right now, and I haven't gone by the park lately, but I think they still might be working on the busto to bring it back. And so it's a park that is named after Julia de Burgos, which is really important. Next. And so we started working on ArcGIS story maps. And of course, as Keisha said, we ran into a wall because the intra-institutional, like adding collaborators, kind of like how you do on like Google Drive or Google Docs, that you can add multiple collaborators, right? And you collaborate at the same time on one thing, right? It's something that we're waiting on our Rutgers digital humanities person to find Keisha in the system and add her as a collaborator. But it sounds like it's something simple that she can do, but it hasn't happened in a couple of days. So we need to follow up with her so we can do that. But we started kind of, putting together the story maps, and we're learning more about the software. And so as Keisha mentioned before, right, the goal is that the story maps basically becomes the hub, right, where people can find the story, the mapping, and the pedagogical resources. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to share my screen real quick to kind of show you the metadata that we are working on. I don't think it gives me share.
I have it up if you want.
Oh, okay, cool. If you could just show them the metadata.
Yeah.
So metadata is definitely the thing that, as someone who's new to digital humanities doing, not just viewing and engaging with digital humanities, like we started to put together metadata that felt, from our research so far, that felt very Dominican in the sense that it's like the intersection of these two things, or Dominicans in Puerto Rico, or Dominican, or right from what we have found so far. And so even in our metadata, like we learned a lot, and then there's still things that information that we're missing, like years and that kind of thing of certain points and locations and people that we need to add to our metadata so that it can be of high use for our story maps and any other software that we decide to go with. As we always say, feel free to follow us, our project and our progress on Instagram and on X or Twitter, whatever people call it these days. And so we want to thank the USLDH Grants and Aid Program and the Mellon Foundation for being able to help jumpstart this project, because we were able to collect a lot of archival materials. There's still, things that we're still, after you go and collect the archives, well, now you have to go and read everything that you collected and kind of start working with the data. And so that's kind of where we are, and trying to create metadata and doing the story maps. And our goal is really to be able to have a beta version of our story maps before the end of the year and be able to present that, and as well as write about it, so that we can continue to spread the word and continue developing the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Fine. Thank you. Congratulations on this amazing archival materials that you've been able to put together. So the the last presenter for today is Maya Chinchilla, and the title of her grants and aid application was Precursors of Leadership to the Central American Solidarity Movement in the United States. So take it away, Maya. I don't see. Oh yeah, there she is. Is she here? I know she joined.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Oh, there you are. I'm sorry.
Yes. So much good material. I'm so excited for everybody's project. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Usually there's just a little button at the bottom. There it is. Okay. Ooh. Okay. So I am very happy to be here. Finally, there's so much, so many parts to this project, and this grant has really helped figure out, what the first phase is really about. And there are multiple background and impulse for me, particularly to do this work. Sorry, just a moment. I was hoping I could see my notes at the same time that I can do the presentation. Maybe. No. Sorry, I know that we've been here for a bit, and just want to see if I can fix this really quick. Otherwise, I might just do it this way, so that I can see everything. And you can see all my slides, and it's not going to fill up the screen in a really beautiful way, but I think that's better. Okay, so I'm also playing with some of the titles, because the title is really long, and for many reasons, because there's so much that it encompasses. And right now, there's a couple of reasons why the research and the project is going in the direction that it's going. I'm playing with the idea of calling it Love Letters to a Revolution, because it one of the ideas, or one of the things that I've found in the process of this project, is not only newsletters of the organizations I will be talking about, but letters between my parents, who are part of the organizations that I'm interested in uncovering more of the history. So what there are a couple of dates on the timeline that I have uncovered in this, but the challenge and or impetus for this project in the way that I'm looking at it is that my dad is one of the main figures and actors in the Guatemalan solidarity movement of the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And he is also losing his memory, you know, so sorry, I wasn't going to get emotional. Anyway, so part of it is like a race against time to get as much that I can in the time that I have left with him. So even though I am very much interested in uncovering and I'm piecing together a story about particularly the Guatemalan Information Center that was based in Los Angeles, I'm interested in what it, you know, shapes a man who was born in Guatemala in 1936, how his political formation changed, what led to, you know, his being a well-respected leader in this movement. And so, you know, he was a young man who hated politics in Guatemala, and especially because of his experience as a teenager in military school. And when my mom met him in the mid-60s on a Fulbright to study in Guatemala at the University of San Carlos, he was not only apolitical, but he was anti-political. And my mom was very political already at the time. And so in these ongoing conversations I've been having with them, with both of them, they have very different, of course, perspectives about what is important about this history, and how, you know, my dad's, you know, his raising consciousness changed. And so, so together, after meeting, and he comes to the US, he arrives to Wisconsin, where my mom is working on her dissertation or her graduate work at University of Wisconsin, which at the time is sort of the you know, hotbed of student activism. And so there are a couple different points that I want to pull out from this timeline. The organizations that I'm interested in understanding and understanding their participation are at least two of them. So one of them is LAGLAS, which is Los Angeles Latin America for Solidarity of Latin Americans, and they were an organization that was started primarily by academics and students, and they would have monthly meetings in Los Angeles or in the Valley of Los Angeles, and we're still trying to put a finger on when exactly the group started, but it's early 70s and this group ends in the 80s. So these are I have an extensive now set of flyers, meeting notes, other ephemera that I am, you know, attempting to go through, contextualize, and figure out with my mom and some of the former members who are also, you know, in their 70s and 80s, who are interested as well in documenting and passing on this information and making it available for any younger generations who'd like to understand some of that. So but the seeds, and where I'm getting to, because Lagos comes before the Guatemalan Information Center. And so that is truly the spine or the heart of this project, because there is so little about not only Central American organizing in the US, but specifically Guatemalan organizing in the US. And, you know, my parents and some of the organizers in the Guatemalan Information Center are the people that hold a lot of that information. And from the very nature of their organizing style, which was not centered on individuals, even though it was centered on their individual consciousness raising, where they helped each other learn, and you know, everybody in that organization had something, had a skill set, or you know, it was very this idea that everybody has something to bring to it. And so I am constantly asking this question: what moves people to not only found organizations, but to work in solidarity with people that are of their own background, as well as multi-ethnic coalitions, right? Because often some groups in some ways may be identity based, may be very focused on, you know, necessarily kind of smaller group dynamics. But what was different about this particular group in the 80s is that it was connected to a whole host of not only Central American solidarity groups, Latin American solidarity groups, third world, you know, organizing groups internationally, but it was non-hierarchical in its structure. And that was different than, for example, like the Salvadorans that were organizing in Los Angeles. Many of those organizations kind of took instruction from either guerrilla groups in El Salvador, or other you know, organizers that kind of gave them their what they were focusing on to get the message out. Whereas GIC had a much a different kind of perspective, and had more freedom to figure out, you know, what information they were trying to bring to the US public, to place demands on the US government, and get the information out there, right? So my goal with this project is to create some of these archives, and work with these different communities that are, you know, they're like family friends, to talk through with them about how they want to share the information. I think primarily for this organization, for GIC, the main goal of the group is to share with the second generation, which I'm, you know, the second generation Guatemalan in the US. And so there are those of us in that second generation that have met, and, you know, we have our own questions. We were kids, we were babies, you know, a twinkle in their parents' eye at the time. And I've, as a writer and a creative writer, I have written, you know, poems and done like a short kind of poetic film about the idea of being a solidarity baby, right? But the ongoing kind of impulse, you know, by right now, the focus is to get what I can from both my parents, but focusing a little bit more on my father, is this larger kind of community, like almost desperation for us to be seen and have access to our history in a way that is not just kind of like the headlines of whenever we do hear about Central America or Guatemala in particular, it's kind of crisis oriented, right? And what this documentation, these pictures, this ephemera, these oral histories show is that, you know, Guatemalans in the US are empowered actors and thinkers and intellectuals, and worked in coalition with not only other Central American groups, but other organizations, Chicano, Latino groups across, you know, the country, organizations supporting what was happening at the time in Chile, also Puerto Rico, and Argentina, and you know, so these flyers, some of these, the newsletters talk about some of these things, and so that's part of what I'm trying to figure out how to share that narrative and that story. So not only developing the archive, collecting, I'm in the collecting stage. So much collecting is happening right now, and organizing. You know, again, at some point in the future, I'd like to look closer at this kind of non-hierarchical structure of the collaborative, of the organization that was based in Los Angeles. And then, you know, the next phase would be to talk to more participants specifically. So in this image, there's a couple different images and a couple of different things going on. So on the right hand, we have a flyer, hand-drawn flyer, you know, from the 80s, welcoming people to join and learn more about the Guatemalan Information Center. Also, everything was always in Spanish and English. And, you know, always comida, música, slides, right? Because that's one of the ways the imagery and the storytelling of those slides was one of the ways that people gave talks and helped people see what was going on, because all there was at the time is newspapers and kind of really limited mainstream news. So, you know, we have no internet, and I don't even know if there's fax machines at the time. So sometimes handmade flyers, sometimes mimeographed flyers, but always, that was the part that I remember always growing up in, is this element of not only informational and political talks, but food, music, you know, convivencia, right? And that was also the way that a really important part of building that community and those strong connections and ties and trust, right? Because that's another element that I think of as I'm working on this project. The reason why I'm able to have access to all of this stuff is because I'm, you know, trusted to take care of this information. And that's the other aspect of often the difficulty of the second generation, first generation speaking with their parents or, you know, people in the community about why they either left or what happened in terms of, you know, if they were involved or not involved. Lots of silences, lots of well, better not to talk about that. But also some folks like my parents and some of the organizers in GIC were, you know, trained in a way where not everybody had all the information purposefully to protect anybody who was more deeply involved in, you know, political activity, because of course people are being disappeared, you know, murdered, persecuted, having to flee for their lives, right? And so the image on the top is, well, the image on the bottom is members of the organization who I knew as Mara and Aroldo, and I only later in life knew that those were not their given names. Those were the names that they used to protect their identity and their families. You know, dancing and performing Guatemalan folkloric dance and other members of the organization at one of the DIC events. And then up at the top, my father is on the left, and I am in the middle holding a cat, and Mara is above me. That at some point I would like to get help to try to brighten this picture. Maybe, and the other thing that we have found is lots and lots of negatives. So some of the pictures that we found from the negatives have come out really beautifully. So this is like a scan of just the physical picture that I've had for several years. So so this is my living room growing up, and this is often where some of the meetings or organizing happenings, sometimes they had an office in Los Angeles, but also very kind of communal talks and meetings and community building kind of sessions happening in these spaces. And my mom is one in the white tank top all the way in the back. But again, trying to go, in a somewhat in a nonlinear fashion right now, but this is where I'm trying to get to. And this particular grant allowed me to take a step back and go back a little bit further, well, a lot further. And, there is this back to the question of how my father becomes this well-respected organizer. And I say well-respected, but it's interesting because at the same time, my parents were very much not about telling their own personal stories unless it was in service of, a sort of campaign or sharing information. My dad being Guatemalan, my mom being German American, they had different kind of tactics of they're able to talk to people in different ways. And both of them, my mom often translated a lot of everything, was always in Spanish and English. And my dad was a very, kind of powerful speaker, but I'm just always taken by the ways that from what others have told me is how they didn't sort of center themselves. So the top picture on the left is a new picture that I found. And my father is the military cadet in the middle, kind of giving the side eye. I don't know if you can see him, but he has his hands folded. He's directly in the middle. And I've grown up, I always heard about his experience being in military school. And the second year that he was in military school is 1954. And so on August 2nd, 1954 is when a US sponsored coup, and what I've always been told is, one of the first sort of CIA sponsored interventions in Latin America, where they then go on to use some of those practices and what they learn in other places like Vietnam and Korea, and happens. And so this is during a time, 1944 to 1954, where they had two presidents and a social democracy for one of the first times in Guatemalan history, agrarian reform, unions are allowed to organize, a lot of positive things are happening. But of course, because there's a lot of land that is owned by the United Fruit Company and, the Dulles brothers in the US, who are closely related to the government in the US, when some of the activities of Arbenz enacting Arevalo, the previous president, decrees to redistribute some of the land, of course, it starts to be behind the scenes kind of organized, and the US sponsors this liberation army to so-called liberate Guatemala from communism, right? And so that's the narrative that is being used, but the governments at the time absolutely did not identify, as communists, and there may have been some members of the Communist Party and some of their governments, but this is really, this time period, this 1954 coup overthrow is important for this political, formation of my dad for many reasons, and also what's presently happening in Guatemala. So presently, the son of one of those presidents of that time, Arevalo, so the son is Bernardo Arevalo, who was exiled at the time, has actually kind of come from behind and won the most recent presidential election. And so right now, the whole country of Guatemala is practically at a standstill. A general strike is happening because the current government is pulling some, well-known tactics of challenging the elections, right, and the results. So this is I've been studying this time period, or trying to unpack this time period for so long, and yet this, history tends to kind of cycle around and repeat itself, but it's so kind of powerful to, again, try to understand what that means for, if you actually, for example, do care about why people migrate, you will know that people migrate because of the conditions in their country, whether they be political or economic, but all of that kind of thing is related. And, there's an opportunity here for Guatemala to have it can't all be cured in one kind of election cycle, right? But an opportunity for something different, because what Guatemala has seen since 1954 is military dictatorships, backed by the US, and as well as in most recent times, last 10 years in particular, there's a really deep history of corruption, and using the courts itself to bring the past history of atrocities of genocide to light, and then also going backwards and trying, again, jailing people based on their political beliefs. So
I wonder if we could maybe put a
wrap up.
Yeah, wrap up if that's okay, so we can.
Okay, sure. And so and then there's my dad in this last picture here, in a protest in Los Angeles. So it's just, the jump from here to here is what I'm trying to kind of unpack. And then these are some notes in his own handwriting, again, that I found. When I present this stuff to him, he doesn't have a memory, or it's some of it may have been blocked out for various reasons, but it's a list of places to contact, organizations, Chicano groups, La Raza Unida, the new movement Solidarity, Puerto Rican Independence, so there are all these, again, at that time they're working with GIC, and the amount of coalition and solidarity that is happening, and I'm able to, from some of these notes, uncover the political imagination of my father. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about it.
This is just empowering. It's so amazing to see the various presentations that we saw today, bringing the humanity back to into the archives, right, and documenting the lived experiences of the Latino community in the U.S. It's just so empowering. So we'd like to open up the floor to questions from our audience members, to each other. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or drop it into the chat. And my team and I, we did prepare a few questions that we could, get the ball rolling if we get people to warm up and ask questions. One of the things that that kind of, you know, has constantly stood out in all of the presentations from yesterday and today are all the ethical concerns, right, that you are facing as you're working with archival materials from different communities, etc. So I wonder if I know that some of you touched upon that a little bit, but I would like to hear a little bit more about how you are centering, your ethics within your research projects, especially as they become public facing, archives, right? So whoever wants to, get started, it would be, go ahead, just unmute yourself.
Yes, I can start. We've been thinking about this a lot. I think at one of the trainings this summer, I talked a little bit about, it was kind of the kickoff moment for us for gathering MOUs and trying to figure out how to protect the people we've been conducting oral histories with, who have kind of ranged, and folks who are really enthusiastic to work with the university and folks who are rightfully suspicious of what might happen to their story, and how they might be treated by the university given their experiences at San Jose State as students. There's some really interesting things this summer. Was the discovery of materials related to the Chicano movement, where if you look at the archival materials, you would take away, here's a document from a leader of the movement who was involved in EOP, the protests, and I think I had posted something on Facebook, and I'm Facebook friends with some of the other alums, and one of them instantly was like, "Don't trust anything this person says," and so I think for us, like part of the reason that we've been going slowly in developing the project is the need to, communicate with the alums and verify stories. And of course, there's like competing memories, but there's also, for whatever reason that people tell stories that aren't necessarily true, whether they can't remember or they have a different agenda or whatever that is. So I think historical accuracy is really important. And then the other thing for me, we didn't mention this in the presentation, but there's a whole host of materials that we looked at that has to do with the Reagan administration in California, and he was governor, and all of what he did to not only trying to suppress social justice movements, but also pit, ethnic minorities against each other, whether through funding or through new administration policies, etc. And from my experience of teaching and then doing this kind of research and being a student at San Jose State, there's this really, I think, troubling legacy of that. And that's a story I think that needs to be told, and the university needs to do some work, or we need to push the university to acknowledge that legacy of corporatizing the university, of pushing down and suppressing student stories, and then, engaging in various forms of erasure and really unethical treatment of people and their histories. So that's a host of ethical issues, and how to do that in a way that protects everyone is something I constantly think about. And I'll just end by saying, I wrote a letter of recommendation for the university archivist. She's going up for tenure. And she came to my class and gave this really wonderful presentation to my students last fall, where she talked about the emotional work of being in an archive and working with these kinds of materials. And I think that's another part of something I'm thinking about that we have to center in our project, is the emotional labor of like doing the research, of thinking about it, of actually engaging in the social justice movements in the 60s and today, and how we can connect all of that not just to San Jose State, but the people engaging in that labor in the community today. Sorry, that was all over the place. I think about this a lot. So thank you for letting me share. I'm sure Olivia could add to that. But
Yeah, we with oral history, we definitely want to be very careful. You know, these are not our stories. So, and for a lot of these people, it wasn't the best time in their lives. And so we want to give them as much grace and letting them share as much as they feel comfortable with. And, you know, drafting MOUs that give them a lot of control over how they want their story told. We never want to make them feel like their life experiences, their stories are out of their control. And so, you know, we've tried to be as careful as possible with letting them speak for themselves. And that's kind of the main thing of our project is we want to help them tell their story. We never want to do it for them.
I want to jump in just to answer the question as well. I think that one of the things that we found as we've been building our social media and the project is, and dealing with the ethical pieces of it, is really engaging the community and the folks that we've met through the archives and the writers. Like everything from like when we would publish something on our Twitter, like if they corrected us, we'd go back, oh, thank you for that. Or we would ask, how do you want to be named, or how do we say this? As well as getting a lot of input from them in terms of the project, in terms of the data, and being able to share that with them in the sense of here's what we're doing, and asking them too. I mean, in many ways, the folks who we have met, whether they're archivists, librarians, writers, artists, are folks who we have also asked for input into, you know, how can this project best reflect what is actually happening here, right? Or what this is actually about. And so that's definitely something that we didn't, it's not that we didn't plan on it necessarily from the jump, but it's definitely, there are things that kind of come up, and as you experience them, you're you know, as a ethical researcher, you kind of in some ways like, oh, okay, this is what I need to do to make sure that these voices are centered, and not like, let me go and take this and put it into my project and here you go and feed it back to you. Like, no, that the folks that these histories are about are also part of the project, right? They are collaborators.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here and say that we also, especially when it's not archival data, which is like something that you don't really think about just like taking a picture of and posting, because, you know, there's rights that are already like attributed, right? And everybody has their publication info and all of that. When we were posting on social media or just sharing anything, we always ask for consent first. Like I remember meeting with every author and saying, hey, like, and because it seems innocent, like, oh, I'm just posting this, but you know, our social media does become its own archive, and it's also like, what are you presenting and in what way? So we would always say, hey, we're going to take this picture. Do you allow this picture to be on the social media site or not, or in a future like publication? And we would get like a verbal yes or no. And then we'd always ask about what name do you want to use? Because, for example, I know a writer that we met with has like a moniker for like her writing, but she has like, you know, her formal name. So like she would also say, oh, refer to me here as this way. So I think it's like in the early development of this like very like nascent project, we're thinking about, you know, those ethical concerns, and also like, what is it that you want included or off the record? Like we met with another author who said he was very clear about censorship and protecting himself, and like, and saying, oh, like, these are things that I don't want to answer, or these are things I don't want to include. And we respected those boundaries. And, you know, we made sure that we also created that space for the people that we were working with while we did this work. So I think it's just the approach, right? We always had like that ethical sort of compass. And I think it's also like in our citational practices. Omaris and I had many conversations about like what we were expecting, who we wanted to include, and why. And obviously, like research goes its own course, but we were very adamant about including underrepresented and marginalized people and voices, and those who don't really get the highlight, especially when you are doing recovery work. So I think that's how I guess we approach that question for our project.
I feel like I have a bit of a unique experience with this project, because I am not necessarily thinking about it as like, there is the academic research aspect of it, but but it's personal. And so I've had some conversations with people about how to go about that. And if I'm being given permission by family members, you know, and some of the documents are now mine, or to, and I think it'll just be an ongoing conversation. The one, you know, one issue again with my father is I will tell him about the talk to him about the project, but you know, we've kind of always engaged in conversations about history. He's very you know, he got really excited about ancestry.com at one point in his life, and took a like a senior university class writing his own memoirs, but he doesn't remember doing any of those things, you know. And then some of the stuff that comes up, especially around the things that happen in Guatemala around the military school experience, he kind of lights up and remembers lots of stuff, and some of it's nonlinear. There's other things, you know, other family stuff that's not really a part of this project, but that is coming up, that is exciting, because again, it's a moment where he gets you know, very interactive when other times he's not. And so I think that's just it, my goal right now, because I think there's been so many silences over the years, but he's often given me permission to tell parts of this story. And there are other family members who are always kind of, we I think we're socialized a little bit to be kind of anxious about putting ourselves out there. But I think because, and that is why I'm not necessarily ready to reveal public facing all of the archive yet. I mean, there's just still so much more to do. I think the phases will be, you know, figuring out more of the frames and the context and how to organize the data, and the different stories, and again, other project possibilities. But you know, there are always the questions that come at me of like, well, are you going to use names? And you know, and it's just like, I'm not revealing anything that is not something that is not a part of history. There's not even any historical chisme yet, you know, so or very little of that. So it's all, to me, fascinating and exciting. And you know, of course, as a storyteller, I'm interested in the drama and the behind the scenes and the tensions, but it's an ongoing conversation, I guess, is an ongoing thoughts that I'm having. But you know, my mom is giving me her clear permission to use her work, and I think even though she's, you know, she's an academic and she has written a little bit, but she does it in such a different way, and she has mentioned to me, because of my questions, and I think this happens in any kind of documentary work that I've also done, when you ask people about their story, other things come up that they never thought about, you know. So I consider both my parents, you know, intellectuals, or different types of intellectuals. My dad, an informal one, you know, doesn't have a college degree, but never thought about what might be important to pass on, and how to do that, and how to tell the story of people who were not there. So so again, that's an ongoing conversation about trying to figure out what to share, and the ethics of that, and how to do it. But I right now I have, you know, a certain amount of trust, but then also that, what I call Central American paranoia, you know.
Yeah, sure.
that I've inherited.
Marisa, did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So mostly so far, because we have plans to talk to filmmakers, and do testimonials, other kinds of relational type projects, you know, maybe like a podcast, things like that. But so for right now, I would say that my main ethical concerns are around the use of material in copyright, or the, you know, exhibiting it, because I found that it's really like a lot of this material is not in the public domain. So even, you know, it took me a long time to even find photographs that I could use that were part of the public domain. And even though there are things that are out there, like there's a lot of YouTube videos, you know, digital copies that have been made that were uploaded, and but they probably don't have the rights to do that. And so, I mean, I was really tempted to use those because they are like available. And you know, it's important to have like these digital copies that people can view them for themselves, but at the same time, like I don't want to put anything up that is like an infringement of copyright and would be against the, you know, the wishes of the filmmaker, for example. And yeah, I mean, so that's kind of like a concern, and also like a question that I have about, you know, how do you put up this work without infringing on copyright when those materials are not really publicly available legally? And then, yes, Sonia, I don't know if you have something to add to the ethics of the project as well.
No, I think you summarized it well. I think those are the same concerns that I've shared with you, especially when assembling the timeline and wanting to have, you know, an engaging visual aspect to the projects, the films themselves, and also including the digital copies, as you said, that are available on YouTube. So yeah, those are the same concerns that I share.
I think it's
Right.
important that y'all wove together, so I was gonna jump in, wove together the ways in which the ethical concerns and the emotional concerns are tied together, because most of the time they are, and it's kind of like this, like it's almost our like our conscience telling us like, oh, we need to check into this. And whereas like in other archives and collections, we've noticed that that doesn't necessarily happen. I think that there is definitely something very prominent about working with materials of underrepresented communities, and how that there are a lot of emotions, both with dealing with donors and living communities, right, who are for the first time maybe seeing themselves represented in an archive, how you're like digging up stuff that has never been witnessed by history, or how you yourself, as someone who's working on these projects, might become emotionally triggered by the content. And so like these are all things, not only is it ethical to reproduce something or to put something out there in the public eye, but also, you know, like who is doing the work. And you know, something that we have had to think about is when we've had some sensitive material and we have to determine who's going to work on it. Like we don't want an undergraduate working on this. Maybe like one of us will work on it, and that sort of kind of weighing of the ethical and how it affects us at an emotional level is important, right? I also kind of just want to drop the title of an article that Mario H. Ramirez wrote. It is To Suddenly Discover Yourself by Existing, Uncovering the Impact of Community Archives, and he's written other ones as well, but that's the one that just kind of popped into my head, especially when Maya was talking, right, about uncovering these things that are related to your history, like very personal to you, Maya, but also, you know, even if it's not, I might, like I've been working on, and when I work with an archive, I've mentioned this in other talks when I worked on the like Alonso Perales archive and looking at affidavits about discrimination, even though it wasn't like my grandfather or father or mother who wrote those letters, it was very impactful to me because I recognized myself in the archive, you know, like my community's experience. And so, you know, also making sure that you have time for self-care is important. So I just kind of want to tie that together and how like this, we should not just ignore these emotions, especially since I think, especially from an academic standpoint, we're supposed to be like real standoffish and critical and not let emotion take over. And yet like these are very emotional archives, right? Even if they're not related to us, just the ways in which we represent things and the information that we see and the gaps that we see, because that's also very troubling to see like this was not included before. Mary.
I was going to say your comments, and I'd love to have the title of your article or the article you just mentioned. But I think, you know, from your comments, it makes me think about, you know, my frustration with the university and how it thinks about and deals with this history is like a complete lack of a willingness to be vulnerable and like honest. And students find that infuriating, I think, when they look at this history and they want, like my students, especially in the fall where the project was further along, were saying, you know, how come there aren't videos about this history? Like it's so moving and inspiring, and like it would make me and others want to go to this university more. Like how come they don't do anything? And so yeah. Anyway, I love that what you've said, and everybody else too. I think when it's personal, it matters, right? I think that's part of the work. It's what I love about it the most.
And I think that's something that's been highlighted in the work, and I know like with this group, and I don't mean this in a rude way at all, but you know, you all tend to, you know, spoke a little bit longer than expected, which was totally fine, and it's not so much because, you know, there's a lack of respect for like keeping the time, but rather because we have so much to say about these archival materials that don't get the chance to be made visible. And so, you know, many times I've been told that you know, that we're too ambitious, right? You're like, yeah, like scope it, like so that you present one thing right now and then leave the rest to the other, you know, for another time. But I may not have another time, like to present on this stuff. And I think that's where like the humanity, that's how I see the humanity in these DH projects, right? It could be so focused on the technology, right? And look at what I'm all the wonderful things that I'm going to create with all of this data. But I think the what really stands out is how much care there is in just the fact that you are working with these documents, you're discovering some of these materials, you're having like these first hand conversations with people whom you have never had the opportunity to meet before, right? Or even imagine that those resources were available. Let me see, Lore, you have a comment? Yes. And so thinking about, you know, how empowering that is, and we see that like across all of the different projects that we're working on. So I mean, I want to bring this question now with in terms of like scope, right? How do we get around, you know, thinking and organizing ourselves so that we are really like intentional about, now that I have like all these materials, what are the next steps for my project, right? I think some of you did speak about like the various stages, but I would like to see like where you're at with your scope, like how many phases of this project are there, you know, how do you imagine it growing, and the different, you know, facets that you imagine for this work that you're creating.
I'm just going to say, I feel like I had a better answer to that in February when I did the interview with you all for the grant than I do now, simply because some of the questions about what to do with the data that we have sort of become more challenging. I mentioned in the presentation that we discovered that archives will not accession like collections in progress for them to create at least the two that we've talked to locally, which seem like the most logical. And so we've been now thinking about figuring out ways to do this in stages so that the interviews, now knowing that we have all of the paperwork for approvals and we probably have redundancy of where we preserve the recorded data, and then we make a decision at what point are we going to stop conducting oral history interviews to be able to then give archives the data. We also kind of talked back and forth about whether San Jose State should be the home of this stuff or whether an institution that tends to ignore and suppress this history shouldn't be the steward, and it should be like the Freedom Archives, which has a very different policy in how they archive materials. They don't use collections, they use kind of themes. So if somebody donates a series of papers, those papers may not stay together. They're going to be distributed among the different issues that archive kind of focuses on. So I think we're still thinking about how exactly we'd like to proceed with what we've gathered. But in terms of the next stages of the project for what we want to do, now that we have amassed the data and we're starting to play around with digital tools of how to visualize best and how to create the archive best, I think we'll have a better sense at that stage what the institutional partners are going to look like, etc. There are issues for us too with, like, I hope some of you are applying for the ACLS. I think it's digital justice. I'm trying to remember the digital justice grant. I was hoping to apply for that with our university archivist, and she's wonderful, by the way. She's like she's just incredible. I can't think of like a better person to be in charge of challenging the system. But she was like, I do not want to work with San Jose State's research institution that manages the grants. She was like, nope, I don't have time this year to do that. So there's that kind of issue for us too, thinking about like the next stage of getting funding for this work. That's really important for me, not just for getting funding for my own labor, but making sure Olivia has support to be working on this as well. I don't know if that answers your question fully. We're in the process of revising, rethinking and revising.
Mm-hmm. And we do have another question about if anybody wants to talk about any specific challenges that you guys had. I think the one that I think is already an important one is the one that Kishla and Omari's face, which is, when we're working with the software and technology, right? So these are some things that we don't necessarily think about. Are there any other challenges that you all want to bring up? Because this is we plan to share these conversations and on our YouTube channel later on, and we like to usually prepare also like FAQs for people who have who have encountered similar problems as they begin to prepare and scope out their projects. It's always good to have advice that you might want to give to future scholars who are beginning to do digital humanities projects. So maybe if you could talk about like the challenge, and then maybe if you found a way around it, or if it's just a challenge that you're still facing and you're thinking you need help to solve it.
I think I mentioned this in the training in June, but I've used story maps for another project, and that's one that I had the same frustration. I put that in the chat of not being able to collaborate easily. And then I don't know if you both know this, but also it's horrifically difficult to try to embed in anything else. It's kind of its own, the best way to do it is just to have like a link to go to that story map. So I found that to be, and I'm kind of wary of it, although I really like their timeline. It's really beautifully designed and dynamic. And but I do think that it's good to use, like, Timeline.js is also not my favorite in terms of design, but I found those to be really useful for prototyping and then figuring out if we want to take the time to actually design something else. I've done the same for walking tour, like the basic walking tour and what it would take to play around with like a free version as opposed to paying for a subscription to see how that would work. I really found the tutorials that you put together for us and some others that I found online to be super helpful. But yeah, those like unexpected, you want to enter more data and can't, or you want to make connections in a database, and it's not it's there but not intuitive. All of that's been kind of challenging. I'm hoping, I don't know if others would be interested in this, but I'm hoping once our projects are further along, maybe we can be peer reviewers for each other to go through and like play around with what we've done and sort of, because we know something about it.
Based on that, and I don't know if Gaby might have been on the same wavelength as me. I was
gonna, for
suggest, yeah.
The reviews in digital humanities.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you say it, Lori.
Okay, so I would strongly suggest that you submit your projects to be reviewed for DH reviews in DH, and I'll drop the link in a second. And that way it helps give visibility to your project, and it's also a great way to get feedback from other people. So yeah, definitely like reach out to everybody. I think this is a great group to reach out to get like feedback, and just exactly what Mary said.
Great. Does anybody want to share any other challenge, or if you all, if you want to say anything else about your project before we close?
Oh, I'm curious if anybody, I used, so I have a website, like a URL for this project, but I'm curious what folks have used for hosting, and if they're, if anyone has advice, suggestions, and for website design, and how to deal with it. I've thought about in the future maybe getting help for the back end technical elements of it to make sure that it's stable and that kind of a thing. But I'm curious if anyone else is working on a website for their project that isn't like a template site through like a Google site or something, but like I think mine is through the design portion is through WordPress, which is very clunky in the service I've selected.
Yeah. No one. Well, we thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to have had the opportunity to be in community with all of you, and get to see your projects, get to be, we had a chance to be part of this amazing work and important work that you're doing. As you all can see, it's, making these communities visible is part of the work that we're trying to do through the grants and through the work that Arte Público has been doing for a long time, right? Since the foundation of Arte Público and the recovery program. And it is our commitment to continue to do the same, to continue to lend our shoulders so that other scholars stand on our shoulders, and they reach, farther and beyond than what we can and what have been able to do. We hope that you are able to do the same to your own communities and your students. We have to, we will be announcing the new, a new set of grants in aid that will be awarded. These will be the last from the initial Mellon grant that we received for our center. So we hope that you're able to help us share that announcement, as wide as possible, so that we identify another core group of digital humanists who are working with Latino archives. If you know of anybody who should we, give special attention to, please let us know. We would welcome that opportunity. And two other announcements that I'd like to make. We put together a panel for the MLA, for the upcoming MLA, that's going to feature. I don't remember what we call the panel. Do you all remember, Kishla? Nobody's. I was trying to pull it up in my email, but I searched MLA and I had like 50 emails come up. But anyway, we are presenting on the joy of archive in digital humanities. And we're going to have a roundtable at the next MLA session, and this will be one of the featured panels for digital humanities and for the conference because we tied it to the theme. So we hope that if you're at the MLA conference this year, that you join us. And then what I might try to do is I might run like a little Facebook Live type of thing so that we can bring in our community who can't be there. And then the other thing that we wanted to announce is that the call for DH 2024 has already come out. DH 24, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is one of like the largest digital humanities conferences that happens every year, and that conference travels all over the world, right? So this year it'll be in the US or North America, and then the next year it'll be in Europe, and then I think in Asia. And so this year it's going to be at UVA, and I think I don't remember when it was, Laura. I was supposed to look at it, but it's going to be
It's in August
of 2025 or 2024.
Yeah, and actually here it is. It's at George Mason University on August 6th through the 9th. Couldn't find this the other day.
Okay, so it's not at UVA, so it's at George Mason in Washington.
It is in Arlington, Virginia. That's why we were thinking.
So it'll be there, and so we are gonna we're gonna try to organize panels, and our goal is to organize at least have our group of like our listserv and the people that we work with, our contributors, put together at least 3 panels with like-minded materials. And so we will share the panels that we're working on, and then you all can sign yourselves up to be part of of the panels that we will be submitting, or feel free to submit your own panels. I mean, I invite you. Carolina, Lorena, and I have participated in the DH24 in DH conferences once or twice already, and they're wonderful. It's a great opportunity to network and meet other scholars, and then it's also very important. We continue to work against this idea of doing digital humanities from a very anglicized perspective. And so it's always good to present these projects that are centering our communities and really are talking about how do we address these ethical issues that we have been talking about for the past 2 days. So we'll make that announcement available, share that with you all, and hopefully you can join one of these panels with us. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much. I wish you the best of luck. Don't forget that share the link of your projects with us so that we can have it and showcase it. It'll be part of our final report to Mellon, and we're very excited to have been part of your work up until now. Take care, everyone. Yes, I think we are meeting. I think there's some meetings that are still, we will continue to have some more meetings, but I think for now, like this is a good way to just have a sense of where you're at with your projects. All right, cuídense mucho, que estén bien. Bye bye.